I can really easily go to just assuming the worst about your intention.
You can't solve conflict by running from conflict.
You're sitting there thinking about how you're going to win this argument.
Don't be a weenie. You're listening to Let's Get Naughty,
a podcast for real talk and honest conversations about all things relationships and marriage. The good, the bad, and the naughty.
Whether you're already married, almost married, or wanting to get married, we're here to help you build a solid foundation for a love that lasts. Let's get naughty, y'all. Welcome into the next episode of Let's Get Naughty.
Yeah, get excited. This is going to be a good one. We're really excited to share this with you. I guarantee you're going to walk away from this episode with a really tangible, practical understanding of communication patterns with real tools to walk away from. This is one of our favorite things to teach, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of what we will continue to talk about on this podcast is going to be about communication and how we interact with each other. That's obviously just a core concept and just one of the things at the core of all relationships, especially one as intimate as marriage. Communication is so important.
Totally. And what we find a lot is that everyone knows communication matters, right? Everyone knows you got to communicate, you got to learn to communicate, but how often do people feel like they actually have an understanding of how they communicate? Being able to identify what your patterns are and having really tangible, practical tools to communicate better, that's where we see true change in people's relationships and marriages. And so we're really excited to dive into this one because this is good.
Yeah, this is a good one. And I think that's a really good point just on the front end, is just to understand that as humans, we follow patterns and our communication follows patterns. And what we want to talk about today is going to be those negative patterns that really lead to miscommunication, misunderstanding, frustration, and you can start to identify these and identify them in yourself. And so as you're listening to this podcast, I think a great thing to be doing is just to be looking at yourself and saying, okay, which couple of these do I really do in my marriage, in my relationship, but also just in life? How do I communicate in general?
Yeah, that's so true. We're going to talk probably mostly in relationship to marriage because we're going to share our experience with each other. But these communication patterns apply to any relationship in your life. I mean, we've used this with friends and family. This will help any relationship that you have. And
so we like to use a little analogy. Is it called an analogy?
No, it's an alliteration.
Alliteration.
I know, is it? I don't know.
All right. Insert from Google, whatever this is supposed to be. I'm a
grammar freak. I should know what this is. Is it an alliteration or
no?
Is that when,
it's when alliteration is when
my name, Molly Mason. No. I'm not sure.
Well, that's embarrassing. All right.
Okay, well, we want to challenge you to not be a weenie.
Don't be a weenie.
Weenie, WENI, is the 4 main negative communication patterns that most humans will default to. So we all have, like Kajner just said, we all have patterns in our lives that it's shaped by our personality, by what we saw growing up, by what we've been taught about communication, by what we believe about communication. So we're going to cover weenie is 4 of the main negative communication patterns. We're going to challenge you when you listen to this episode as we talk through these 4 things, think about which one of these do I do? Because the truth is you probably do a little bit of all of them. We all can have the ability to do all of them, but more than likely there's going to be one really strong one for you, maybe a second that you tend to default to. So think about that as you hear us talk through these. Also, on that note, I'm going to challenge you too. What we find a lot when we go through these is sometimes it's a lot easier to identify your partner's negative patterns than your own, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's so much easier to see the sins and the faults of other people than it is of ourselves. So something that you'll hear us say a lot around here is to draw the circle around yourself. What that means is we believe in practicing humility and responsibility, taking responsibility for your piece in a relationship. So draw the circle around yourself and fix what's in the circle.
Yes. So what that looks like is I'll focus on my negative communication patterns and improving those, and not looking at how my wife is a horrible communicator and all the way she has negative patterns.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be fair, like when we go through this episode, you're going to notice like, oh, that's what my husband or my boyfriend does. You know, you guys can have healthy conversations about that, but we're just going to challenge you to try to focus on yourself and own your own.
Let's jump in and figure out what's our weenie.
Yeah. Okay. So off the bat, we'll tell you WENI, WENI. W stands for withdrawal. E stands for escalation. N stands for negative interpretation. And I stands for invalidation. So let's go through each of these one at a time.
Yeah. So let's start with W for withdrawal.
This is an unwillingness to stay in hard conversations. So, I mean, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. You withdraw from conflict. So this can look like avoidance, running away from conflict, shutting down. And it's really important to note there's kind of two kinds of withdrawal. You can have physical withdrawal where you literally separate yourself from the conflict, the conversation. So that looks like walking out of the room, leaving the house, driving away, hanging up the phone.
Just going in a different room, you know, like just spending time away from your spouse in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. Not texting back, that can be withdrawing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, that's a modern version. Hanging up the phone, who even talks on the phone anymore.
Unfollowing your partner on Instagram.
Oh my gosh.
That'd be next level, wouldn't it?
Next level.
We're millennial, but I don't think we're quite at that level.
Do you even follow me on Instagram?
I think so.
Okay, so it can be physical withdrawal, but it can also be emotional, which is just like not engaging. Cashmere, I don't know if you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, I'll take the lead. So withdrawal is absolutely my go-to.
Mm-hmm.
And what that looks like a lot of times for me is to withdraw emotionally. And I'm already not the most emotional person. And so being emotionally available for Molly is just really important in our relationship. And when we're in conflict, one of the things that I can do that's really hurtful is to just turn off my emotions and be a robot and just not have any availability or any care or kindness for my wife. And so I might be physically present, but I'm not truly present in that conflict and with my wife in a loving way.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great example because you don't tend to like slam the door and run away, but you just, if we're in conflict that you as an introvert don't want to engage in, you'll just kind of like shut down. And I'm like sitting here trying to work with you and you're just like checked out. You know, that's kind of what that looks like.
Being emotional is definitely not a natural state for me. That's something I've had to grow in marriage.
Have grown in it.
I have grown in it. But it's something I've had to grow in marriage. Yeah. And so, especially during conflict, that is such a way for me to retreat and be extremely unemotional in a very hurtful way.
Yeah.
But there's also like we have other friends that it might look physical for.
Yeah,
you know, I think one of a very hurtful thing is to completely leave. I think sometimes, you know, going into another room can be helpful.
You did that like 3 days ago.
I did that 3 days ago. Yeah, we totally had conflict like 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And I did that. And so I think there's some physical withdrawal that can be hurtful. I think
sometimes it's healthy though.
Sometimes it's healthy.
Like in that moment, I think it was good for you to like go to the bedroom and simmer down, which we'll actually get to in a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what isn't helpful is if one person just storms out of the house and goes for a drive without telling their partner and is intentionally trying to withdraw themselves in a way to hurt their partner.
Yeah. So for each of these negative communication patterns, we are going to give you what we call an exit strategy. And this is like a tangible, practical action that you can take to not get stuck in your negative pattern. So this is like the antidote to your negative pattern.
So if we were just talking about withdrawing and you're like, oh, that sounds like me.
Yeah.
Then this is for you. This is, hey, this is your homework to go work on.
Yep.
For withdrawers, it's very simple. It's to step in and have those hard conversations. And that sounds so simple, but for a withdrawer, that is such a great mindset to say, hey, I need to step into this conflict and I need to be an active participant in trying to seek reconciliation and love my spouse or love the other person, because it really takes that. You can't solve conflict by running from conflict.
Right.
That does not work.
Right. Yeah. So that means don't fake peace. Yes. Don't just ignore the conflict or brush it under the rug. You've got to lean in. And I think there's some validity to, if you need a moment, like, that can be healthy. Like, sometimes when we're in conflict, you do kind of need to withdraw to kind of get your head on straight, and then we can come together and have a healthier conversation than if I just sit there and like force you to engage when you're not really in it. So, there's like some grace here, but be honest with yourself about if you're actually withdrawing just to like run away from the conflict. And I guess I don't think I really mentioned this before, but I think it's important to note that withdrawal can also just look like being a peace faker, right? Like just someone who doesn't engage in conflict, and a conflict avoider, which I think is something that I tend to do a little bit. Once we're in conflict, I like desire to lean in and fix it and resolve it ASAP. But I can tend to like not want to engage conflict that could possibly come because I don't like not being okay with you.
Yeah, totally. That's a great example. It's not just at the peak moment of conflict. It can be when conflict is, simmering up and starting to rise. I think that's probably in here when we see it from you, is you don't want to hit the point where we actually are actively engaged in conflict.
Yeah.
Because so Molly's hilarious in conflict, because as soon as we're in conflict, we must reconcile this right now. Like I can't do anything until we're reconciled. And so getting to the point of starting that conflict is a great example of probably a weakness also.
So true. I saw a meme recently. I think this is the Enneagram 2 in me, but it said, what did it say? It was like, I don't need everyone to like me. I just need no one anywhere on the face of the earth to be mad at me for any reason.
To dislike you.
Yeah, like that's me. I'm like, no, we have to fix it. So I've learned in our marriage, I've really grown a lot in that. Like I know now, and part of it, which I feel like this is a whole other episode to kind of talk about conflict on another level. But part of it is that I definitely came into marriage with the mindset that conflict was bad and it meant something was wrong with us. So anytime conflict came up, I would like panic and like need to fix it. And now I have a much healthier understanding that conflict isn't failure. And so if we get into like a tiny little tiff or something comes up, I'm much more able to like let it chill, give him the space he needs, and then like address it later. And usually we move on much faster than if I like lean in when you're not into it.
Absolutely. So just to recap, if you are a withdrawer, be willing to step in emotionally and physically to have those conversations that are hard.
Yeah.
And if you're like Molly in this, be willing to initiate those conversations at a wise time.
Yeah.
To have a healthy conflict and a healthy resolution and don't let that just build up and grow, because sweeping things under the rug is the worst.
So true.
So E is for escalation, and that is a negative response that raises the level of the disagreement. So a lot of times this looks like one-upping either each other or trying to win the argument. It's a lot of elevation.
Right.
And so
raising the temperature of the conflict.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot of signature, what we think of conflict in this negative pattern. And so this can be raising your tone, raising the harshness, starting to yell, starting to talk demeaningly to your spouse. It can be physical. It can be slamming doors.
Yeah.
It can be angry body language.
And that also can look like even just the words that you use. So maybe you're not yelling at each other, but one of you says something kind of snarky and the next one like says something harsher, and you're just kind of making cutting remarks, saying something a little bit worse than the last person said, like trying to get your dig in. That can be escalation as well.
So I don't think that I don't feel that I'm an escalator.
No,
and you're definitely not an escalator.
I'm definitely not.
you're like, let's lower the conflict and get out of conflict as soon as possible. Yes. But that was definitely something, that I just saw growing up in my family, that when someone, a communication pattern I saw a lot growing up was that when someone would start escalating conflict, then other people would start to escalate, and it just went up and up and up. And that can be so hurtful. And a lot of what we've talked about is escalation with other escalators when you're just playing off of each other. But a good example is that we're not, a lot of times marriages have two different types of negative communication patterns, and they can play off of each other. And so a good example is we just talked about withdrawal. If you have an escalator with a withdrawer, then the escalator is going to continue to get louder and more mad and more angry. And the withdrawer is just going to go deeper and deeper into withdrawing and into their shell. And that can be just like such a hard pattern to overcome.
Right.
And you can just see, as we continue to talk about it, all of these communication patterns can really play into the other ones for other people.
Yeah, for sure. So this one might be kind of obvious, but the exit strategy for escalation is to take a timeout. So if you feel yourself like the temperature is rising and you just want to get in there and get nasty with that conflict, just take a break, like walk away, withdraw what we just told the withdrawers not to do. That's what you need to do, right? Like take a moment, step away, do what you need to do to get your head on straight.
When you're in conflict and it's escalating, there's typically not a lot of good outcomes. And so taking a break and not saying what you want to say in that exact moment, that's going to last a lot longer than just that moment of time. Like take a break, take some time, go pray about it, go like look yourself in the mirror and just self-evaluate before you start to do and say those things that are going to be extremely hurtful.
Yeah, that's so true. This can apply to anyone and any negative communication pattern. It's not just escalators that do this, but something that we really try to do in our marriage, I think we do a really good job of, is being really careful about saying things that you can't take back. Just like not using hurtful words. One thing that came to mind just when you were saying that was the concept of like always and never. Being really cautious about that, saying like you always do this or you never do this, those big generalizations, or just saying like hurtful things about the person's character, or just like things that are more focused on them as a person than like the specific action of the conflict, like trying not to dig into things that are past what you're trying to address in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to identify what your negative communication pattern is, because me calling for a timeout might not be the best as a withdrawer, but as an escalator, that is like so key. And so identifying what you are helps you know what you need to do and what you need to work on, and what's going to be a healthy thing to do in your marriage and in your relationship.
Exactly. Look, y'all, with divorce rates near 50%, there is no question getting married is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make.
That is why we created Ready to Not, our premarital course to help you build a solid foundation for a lasting marriage.
You'll take the world's leading relationship assessment, get a personalized report on the strengths and growth areas of your relationship, and watch lessons where we help you understand your results and give you tools and exercises to grow in 9 different areas.
This is designed to give you structure to have the important conversations you need to have and to get clear on your expectations in everything from finances to family, conflict, sex, roles, faith, and so much more.
Research has proven that investing your time in a course like this will increase your marriage success rate by 30%. Don't just prepare for your wedding day. Invest time preparing for the lifelong marriage that will follow it.
And if you're already married, can we just say that this would make an amazing wedding gift? With Ready to Not, we'll help you move into marriage with clarity and confidence.
And a special discount just for Let's Get Naughty listeners, go to nottedmarriage.com/ready-to-not and use code LGK25 for $25 off. That's nottedmarriage.com/READYTOKNOT and use code LGK25 for $25 off.
Now back to the episode. So our next negative pattern is negative interpretation. So negative interpretation is believing the worst about your partner's motives and assuming that your spouse is not for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Molly, you want to talk about this one a little bit? I'll
take this one because this is for sure my main negative pattern. Yeah, this is a big one for me. I notice that when we're in conflict, I can really easily go to just assuming the worst about your intentions. I always give this example with our couples. It's silly and stupid, but Kashmir is not the cleanest person in the world.
What? This is shocking to hear.
And also with that, just like not the most observant. And so something that is very common for Kashmir, my old roommate Tori can attest to this because he would do it at our old apartment too. Kashmir just leaves cabinet doors open and drawers open all the time.
Like all the time.
All the time. I'm very OCD on the other hand, and I love to have a clean, tidy home. And one of my greatest pleasures in the whole entire world is to wake up to a clean kitchen. Like I love waking up early in the morning and walking out to my clean, beautiful kitchen. And I'm not kidding. Like 80% of mornings, even though
that is so dramatic.
It's not, babe. It's not. I love you. It's not. It's actually
highly
true.
Dramatic.
Okay. It's not. But
check the camera footage.
Okay. I'll start documenting.
Yeah, we might need
I'll keep a tally.
We're gonna get a camera.
The next 2 weeks, I'll tally how many. No, well, now you're gonna be like extra aware and you're gonna shut them. But basically, I tidy the kitchen up. I close all the cabinets when I go to bed. Most of the time, Kashmir gets the munchies while I'm falling asleep and has another snack. And so I wake up to cabinet doors open and things out, and I don't love it. And a lot of mornings I catch myself going like in my head, I get frustrated and I'm like, he doesn't love me because if he cared, he would have shut the cabinet door because he knows that I hate this. And like, I just automatically assign motive to things, tend to let my thoughts assume the worst about your intentions, even though like the truth of the matter is you're just very oblivious.
Oh, I'm so oblivious. And I mean, who closes cabinet doors at like 11 or 12 p.m. when they're half asleep? I mean, I'm just hungry. I'm not tithinking about closing.
It'd be really, really hard to shut the door. But I mean, again, like that's a stupid example, but I like to share that because it's like, obviously, Kashmir's not failing to shut cabinet doors because he's mad at me and he's doing it to spite me. But I tend, because my brain goes to like, well, he should know that this matters to me. And so he's doing it intentionally because he wants to, like I just let my brain go there. So for me, negative interpretation is a lot about just assigning motive to things and just assuming the worst about you and believing that you don't love me and you're not for me and you're just like doing things out of spite or whatever.
I think this is actually a good thing to bring up, is that negative interpretation can be interpreting actions and what someone does or doesn't do.
Right.
But I think it's also important to just know a lot of it is in words. You know, how many times, something that men and women struggle with, where something can be said where, that dress looks nice, and what Molly might hear is just nice. Like, it doesn't look fantastic.
Or all my other dresses are terrible.
Yeah, right. Right. And so I think that's a key, those are really two examples of negative interpretation that I think sometimes we can look at either the action or the words, but it's really both. And to say this nicely, babe, I think sometimes it's both for you, where sometimes what I say can be taken with the worst context of what I'm trying to say.
Right. So the exit strategy for negative interpreters is to just believe the best about your partner and assume that they meant the best and that their actions or their motives were pure and that they love you and that they're for you. Something that I think about a lot is that so much of our marriage is my own thoughts, like my narrative that I'm believing. And so if I wake up and decide that my husband hates me and he doesn't love me, and like if I'm believing that narrative, I'm looking for things that he's doing and things that he's saying to prove that to be true. And if instead I'm believing the best and I know that Kashmir loves me and we're on the same team and I'm just believing the best about him and his intentions, it's a lot easier for me to not negatively interpret because I'm like looking for examples of that narrative instead. And so I don't know if that's helpful context, but that's something that I think about is just like, okay, what narrative am I believing and what narrative am I feeding with my thoughts and my assumptions about his words and actions?
To be fair to Molly, I think I'm so sarcastic and I take very few things seriously, that when I do say things, it can be easy to over time take offense. And so, I think just some wisdom would be that if you're married to someone who negatively interprets, something you can do as their partner is to speak affirmation and to speak the things that you love and care about with them, and to build them up so they can have something to counter that narrative.
Yeah, that actually makes me realize I'd be really curious if you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, you can comment, or maybe if you're listening, you can send us a DM. I'm so curious for the fellow negative interpreters out there. Do you feel like words of affirmation are high on your list? Because that's really true for me. Like you just said, like I think you being intentional to affirm me and say you love me and like use words to communicate those positive things, that definitely does help me kind of like buffer my instinct to jump to negative interpreting. It's important to note these are patterns that you more than likely will have one or two that you default to, but that doesn't mean that you have to do them, right? Like the whole point is that this might be what you try to do, but you can grow in it and do less of it. And so like this, both of us have learned to do a lot less of our personal communication patterns. But then I love that you just pointed out, like you can also be aware of your spouse's negative pattern and know what they need. And so something that we like to share is that to ask your partner the question, how can I help you do blank less? Like, how can I help you have less desire to withdraw? What do you need from me to not want to run away from the situation? And you asking me like, how can I help you not assume the worst about me? It's a great example because I can turn around and say, your affirmations really help me. And so you do that. You like intentionally build me up every day throughout the day. And that for sure helps.
I think that's like, level one of understanding negative communication patterns is to draw a circle around yourself and to focus on handling your negative patterns well. I think the next level up is to handle yours well first, and then to say, hey, how can I love my spouse with just their negative patterns so we can communicate really well.
Right. Yeah. So don't listen to this episode and go, oh my gosh, my husband's a withdrawer, and just let that be an excuse to like be annoyed with him when he withdraws. Instead, like lean into that and understand that that is how your husband is wired. But how can you two come together and serve each other and meet each other in your needs to both come together in your conflict and your communication in a healthier, more productive way?
Yeah.
All right. And our final weenie, the I, is invalidation. So this is putting down the thoughts, feelings, or character of your partner. So I know I kind of mentioned this with escalation. This applies to invalidation too. Like a lot of times this will look like, you know, those cutting remarks, like trying to get that jab in, cutting down what they do, manipulating the facts. This can be really obvious and blatant, but it can also be kind of subtle. And so it can look like a wide variety of things. But the truth is that often invalidators, they're just trying to win. Like that's what they're trying to do. So we go back to like debate school or debate class in school.
Absolutely. This is like if you were in debate, or if you like to debate, like
they teach. This is like the main thing they teach you.
Is the number one way to like win an argument.
Win an argument by invalidating the other person's points.
Yeah. So it's not you making an argument, it's you invalidating your partner's either argument or them themselves to say that their argument or they don't hold the value or the correct opinion or the right to speak into something.
Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking, I don't think that you actually invalidate. I think that I sometimes think that you do because I negatively interpret and I'm very sensitive. And so sometimes I feel that you respond in a way that feels like you're invalidating me when probably that's more me.
I think I have a little invalidate.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little bit of an invalidator. I think maybe less in our relationship. Oh, it's totally the 8 in me. But I do see it more in other relationships that I have is I can invalidate and I can win an argument very well by just tearing someone else's argument to pieces.
Yeah.
And so I think this is just one that I wouldn't, again, withdrawal is absolutely number one.
For sure.
But, and I'm a strong withdrawer.
Yeah.
But I think one that I get a little taste of is definitely invalidation.
Yeah.
Where I can definitely undermine someone's argument very easily. And so, that can look like a few things, like if someone, I work in finance. And so if we're making a financial decision and I say, well, you don't know anything about numbers or finance, I'm going to make this decision for us. Like that's a great, example of someone invalidating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Invalidation can be just, oh man, I hate that I struggle with this a little bit because this one can just really hurt. And this is just going for the jugular, going for the throat.
Yeah.
Win at all costs, just hurt the other person.
Right.
Just to win that argument.
Right. So something that's important to note with invalidators, like we just said, a lot of times their perspective is winning the argument. So what we tend to see with invalidators is the pattern where when you and your partner are like specifically communicating through a conflict, you are not actually listening to what your partner is saying. You're sitting there formulating your response and how you're going to invalidate what they're saying, right? You're sitting there thinking about how you're going to win this argument, thinking about what you're going to say, and you're just like waiting, chomping at the bit to get your piece in. I mean, to be fair, I feel like anyone can kind of do that, like not just invalidators, but that's definitely heavy with invalidators because they're just thinking about winning that argument.
Yeah, if if you're having conflict and you're sitting there and your spouse is speaking and you're not trying to understand the words,
Right.
but you're just trying to sit there and poke holes in everything that
Mhm.
they're trying to bring up, and every, you know, a great example is if my wife was trying to share her feelings with me and I'm going to sit there and poke holes and like why her feelings aren't valid. Like,
Yeah.
ooh, that hurts. And that's,
well, that's exactly why I just said, like, I feel like you invalidate, but it's more about me because I tend to be fearful that my needs aren't valid. Like, that's my own thing.
yeah.
And so it's easy for me to jump to that assumption that you're trying to invalidate them because I'm invalidating my own needs. So that's kind of its own thing. But yeah, that for sure happens for us.
Yeah. That's definitely a secondary, but I can see little amounts of that in our relationship.
Okay, so what's the exit strategy for invalidators? It is to practice humility and give your partner permission to call you out. I have a feeling you will hear me say this in like almost every episode because I say this all the time. I truly believe the answer to marriage, like almost every problem in marriage, is humility. It's just the idea of counting your spouse more important than yourself. And if both partners can do that in their marriage, like that makes for a much easier marriage, right? Like pride is always what gets us stuck. And pride is very present in invalidators, right? Because you're just sitting there trying to win.
You think I struggle with pride?
Yeah. You said it, not me. So, I mean, I really believe humility is the answer to everything in marriage, but just that concept, if you are struggling with invalidation in your communication, in your conflict, practice humility and just like stop trying to win. Something that we like to say is that if you are winning an argument, then you're making your spouse a loser, and no one wants to be married to a loser.
Yeah, don't go to bed with a loser. That sucks.
Yeah. And so just really try to challenge yourself not to have that perspective of trying to win the conflict. Instead, the goal of conflict is mutual understanding. It's not to win the argument. It's not to get your way. It's to both understand the other person's needs and desires and where they're coming from. And so really try to embrace that if you're struggling with invalidation. Like, how can I walk away from this conflict, not being the victor, but understanding my spouse better?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, this is just another way to look at humility, but just hold your spouse and what they say and their opinion higher than your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really tangible, easy way to say.
Yeah, Romans 12:10, I think it is, right? Be devoted to one another, honor one another above yourselves.
Yeah.
We've got to count each other more important than ourselves.
Yeah, definitely something that I guess I'm getting lumped into this I for invalidators train, you know.
No,
it's so true.
You, as I'm really processing this, I think that maybe you did this more earlier on. I think you have really learned not to. And I've also learned better not to let you invalidate me. Like, I've learned to conflict with you better.
Absolutely.
In some ways. Practice humility, but also, as we mentioned, give your partner permission to call you out. So if you're struggling with invalidation, like Kashmir can tell me like, hey, I need you to just like stand up and tell me that I'm doing a bad job of validating your needs, and give your partner, I mean, every marriage, you should be able to give your partner that permission, but especially with invalidators, like give your partner that permission to say, hey, like, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I don't like how you're invalidating me, whatever those patterns, like specific actions look like, but have that humility.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that as you listen to these 4 negative communication patterns, that just 1 or 2 of those really stuck out to you. You know, I hope one was just like, ooh, ow, that is definitely me.
Yep. Yeah, you're probably not going to like hearing about it because you're like, ooh, that hurts because that's the ugly part of myself.
Yeah. And so, hey, if that's you, like, comment on what that is for you, or send us a message just saying what it is and what you want to do to work on it, because I think that's just so important, just to look at ourselves and start to improve those negative communication patterns. And it's something that if you've been married, if you're not married, if you just started a relationship, if you've been married for 60 years, we are all working on managing our negative communication patterns.
True. That's so true. Like, this is something that we really believe is communication and conflict resolution is a skill. So, but because of that, some people are like, oh, I'm a good communicator or I'm not a good communicator. But that's not true. Like, we can all grow and we can all continue to be better because it's a skill that you can continue to hone and be better at. And hopefully this is really tangible for you. We'd love to hear what your negative pattern is. This is a great episode to shoot to your partner. Send it to your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend or fiance.
Yeah, maybe send it to them and tell them what your negative communication patterns are.
And
don't send it over to them and be like, "Oh, you are an invalidator."
Yeah, I was going to say, don't send it to them saying what they are. Send it to them saying, which one of these do you think you struggle with? And you guys can have the conversation about that and talk through your exit strategies and talk through like, hey, how can I better serve you in our conflict because of your defaults, and how can we grow in this together?
And if you have I think a big topic we'll talk around is going to be communication in various forms. And so if you have ideas for communication or other topics you want us to cover on the pod, message those to us. And yeah, we'd love to start talking about this.
Oh yeah, we can't wait to dig in. I just realized, I know that if you send us a DM on Instagram, it's not anonymous. I wonder, now that I think about this, I wonder if I can make that submission form on the website to where you could submit it anonymously. So if you're like, if you want to share with us, like, hey, this is what's going on in my marriage, and you want us to talk through like how to resolve some conflict, those would be some fun episodes.
That would be some fun episodes.
That'd be fun. So we're so excited that you guys are here. We really hope that this is an episode that you walk away with like, this is going to stick with you. That really is our prayer. And we've found this with the dozens of couples we've taught this to. So many of them tell us like, this is what we walk away like really remembering and thinking about and applying to our marriage. So we hope that that is true for you. And we can't wait to hear how it helps you conflict better. Because remember, conflict isn't bad. You just have to get better at resolving your conflict.
Absolutely. So go take what you learned today, go try it this week, and we'll see you for next week's episode.
Yep. See y'all then.
Bye. Thanks so much for hanging out with us for another episode of Let's Get Naughty.
Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you want more encouragement, join us on Instagram and YouTube at Knotted Marriage to check out all the other resources we have to help you build a tighter marriage. If this conversation encouraged you in any way, please consider leaving us a review on whatever platform you're listening and posting a screenshot on social media. That support means more than you know and really helps us reach more couples.
We'll see you for next week's episode. Go get naughty.